Right now, something very uncomfortable is happening. Across parts of the world, especially in the United States, new laws and political movements are being rolled back for protections that many people believed were permanent.
10 years after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage across the United States, it could now be overturned.
Here in our Africa, here in Senegal, we don't accept this homosexuality. That's not in our culture. That's not in our tradition. That's clear.
My name is Nixon Matthews. I'm a Boise resident and proud trans Idahoan, and I am opposed to this bill. I look like a man. Everyone in the restroom sees a bearded man using the men's bathroom. But the only reason I'm being investigated is because someone knows or thinks that I'm trans. And if that officer decides I violated this law, I could go to jail for up to a year. Say I happen to walk behind a woman, and her husband sees someone who looks like me following his wife into the bathroom. What do you think happens next? Maybe the cops get called, but more likely that man is going to follow me into the bathroom, confront me, and even assault me. And it's worth noting that based on existing Idaho code, which I have here and will share, if I were assaulted, that person would face a lighter punishment than I would for using the men's bathroom.
Kansas has invalidated the driver's licenses of 1,700 transgender residents after a new law required them to revert to their sex assigned at birth.
The letter from the driver's license bureau saying my license is invalid.
I received my letter from the Kansas government saying that I need to change my driver's license back to male because that's what I look like, right?
Rights surrounding identity, expression, healthcare, and even existence in public life are all being debated again as if history hasn't existed and as if history hasn't already taught us these lessons. And whenever societies tend to move backwards, they always follow the same narrative that the LGBTQ plus communities are new and something controversial or outside the story of human progress. But history tells us a completely different truth, because LGBTQ plus people have always been here. They have been artists shaping culture, scientists saving millions of lives, inventors building the modern world, and leaders gilding massive companies, not on the margins of history, but at the very centre of it. So I don't want to go into politics necessarily, but this video is to talk about history and things we need to be remembering. It's about recognising many of the things we take for granted today. Technology, art, scientific breakthroughs, even the devices you are watching this on. We are shaped by people whose identities at some point would have been shunned and would still be questioned or legislated against today in the world we live in. And I think maybe understanding that will change how we are in the present. Because when rights are debated, what's really being debated is belonging. So today we are going to look at a few figures from across history, from the Renaissance period to up to now, whose lives remind us of something simple yet powerful. Human progress has never belonged to just one type of person. It has always been built by everyone. If you are new here, then welcome to the channel. Please be sure to subscribe down below. We are on the road to 1,000 subs and I would love for you to be a part of that journey. Let's get into it. To understand just how deeply the LGBTQ plus community really are woven into human history, we have to go back more than 500 years, long before modern identity labels would have even existed. Because one of the greatest minds to have ever lived, the definition of the word genius itself, was very likely a man whose life sat outside of the social expectations of the time. That person was Leonardo da Vinci. When people hear his name, you think of the masterpieces like the Mona Lisa or like The Last Supper. But painting was only a small part of what he did. Leonardo was an anatomist, engineer, inventor, scientist, architect, and a visionary centuries ahead of anyone of his time. He sketched flying machines before airplanes even existed. He studied human anatomy with scientific precision way before modern medicine existed. He imagined technologies that wouldn't exist for hundreds of years after him. In many ways, Leonardo didn't just participate in the Renaissance, he helped to define it. But his personal life is something that is rarely discussed in the classrooms. Historical records show that Leonardo was accused of sodomy in his youth, a serious criminal charge in Renaissance Florence. The case was ultimately dismissed due to lack of evidence, but accusations like this were very socially detrimental at the time, and they were just a dangerous accusation to be throwing around. After this period, historians note that Leonardo was never married, never publicly pursued relationships, and lived surrounded primarily by young male assistants and companions, some of whom remained with him for decades. We definitely can't apply modern labels with certainty. History, I think, rarely does allow for that type of clarity, as strongly suggesting he was gay or same-sex attracted. And that matters not just because sexuality defines his genius, but because I think it challenges a very strong myth. The myth that LGBTQ+ communities are only a modern phenomena. They are not. They were present at the birth of modern medicine, of modern science, modern art, and modern curiosity itself. I think what's especially powerful about Leonardo's story is how contradiction shaped his existence. He lived in a society that was capable of celebrating his brilliance while simultaneously policing who he was allowed to be. He could design machines for the future, but still had potentially needed to navigate fear, secrecy, and social scrutiny in his personal life. Does that sound familiar to you? Even today, LGBTQ+ communities experience a version of this duality, valued for what they contribute, yet questioned for who they are. Leonardo's legacy really does remind us of something important. Human innovation has never come from conformity alone. It comes from people who see the world differently, people living slightly outside of its rules. And if the world had succeeded in silencing people like Leonardo, the world wouldn't just be less diverse, it would likely be less advanced. If Leonardo da Vinci really represents the birth of modern imagination, then this next person represents the birth of the modern world itself. Because without Alan Turing, there is a very real chance that computers, and possibly even the outcome of World War II, would look completely different today. Turing was a British mathematician, logician, and codebreaker whose work laid the foundation of modern computing. Every smartphone, laptop, algorithm, and digital platform traces some part of its intellectual DNA back to the ideas that he helped develop. Before computers even existed, Turing had imagined them. In 1936, he proposed the idea of a theoretical machine capable of solving mathematical equations, what we now call the Turing machine. At the time, this would have sounded extremely abstract. Today, it's considered the conceptual blueprint towards any type of technology. But his most famous contribution came during World War II. Working at Bletchley Park, Turing helped to lead efforts against the Germans to crack the Enigma code, an encryption system believed to be completely unbreakable. The intelligence from his work really allowed Allied forces to anticipate military movements and ultimately helped to shorten the war. Historians estimate his work would have literally helped save the lives of millions of people and may have shortened the war by years. He was quite literally a hero, and yet the country that he had helped save would later criminalise him. In 1952, Turing was prosecuted by the British government for homosexual acts, which were illegal at the time. Instead of prison, he had accepted chemical castration, hormone treatments intended to suppress his sexuality. The effects were devastating. Physical changes, emotional distress, professional isolation. 2 years later, he did in fact die at the age of 41, and it is widely ruled as a self-inflicted passing. It's very difficult to overstate the tragedy here. A man who helped to defeat fascism, punished by the very society he had protected. A man whose ideas had helped shape the digital age, denied dignity in his own lifetime. And this is where history does become deeply uncomfortable, because Turing's story really does make us confront a question. How many breakthroughs has humanity nearly lost, or actually lost, because people were excluded, shamed, or criminalised for who they were? Decades later, the UK government did formally apologise. In 2013, Turing did receive a royal pardon. Today, he is celebrated as one of the fathers of computer science. But recognition came long after it could have helped him. Just because they've pardoned him, it doesn't help the situation. And that pattern matters. Progress often depends on people society doesn't accept until much later. Sometimes, as proven with Turing, too late. Turing's legacy isn't just technological, it is very human. It reminds us that discrimination doesn't just affect the person, it can very much harm innovation itself, because when society tells a person that they don't belong, it risks silencing the very minds that could be capable of changing the world. Of course, not all revolutions happen through science or innovation. Some happen through emotion or through discomfort, through forcing society to look at parts of humanity it would rather ignore. And few artists did that more powerfully than Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was one of the most influential artists of the 20th century, known for raw, distorted portraits that captured anxiety, vulnerability, violence, and the fragility of the human experience. His paintings are not easy to look at. Faces melt, bodies twist, figures appear trapped, isolated and almost screaming silently from the canvas looking back at you. And that was very intentional. Bacon was not trying to create beauty in the traditional sense. He was trying to paint what it felt like to be human. Born in 1909, Bacon lived openly as a gay man during a time where homosexuality in Britain was still criminal. His life unfolded in an era where his very existence was under constant threat, socially, legally, culturally. Unlike many historical figures who hid that part of their lives, Bacon didn't disguise the reality of his experiences. His relationships, heartbreaks, and struggles were deeply shown in his work. His famous series depicting human figures that were distorted often represents themes of alienation and just psychological tension, feelings that many LGBTQ+ people historically experience while living in these societies that often rejected them. And this is where his contribution really does become larger than art. Bacon had helped to change how emotion could be represented. Before artists like him, portraiture often idealized people, polished versions of reality. Bacon did literally the opposite. He showed humanity as messy, fragile, and imperfect. He rejected the idea that people needed to present as perfect or acceptable to deserve attention. In a way, I think that helps to mirror the experience of LGBTQ+ people across history. The fight to not just exist privately, but to be seen honestly, without sanitizing identity just to make others feel comfortable. His work influenced generations of artists, filmmakers, designers, and cultural thinkers. The visual language of modern psychological art owes an enormous debt to Bacon's willingness to really confront discomfort head on. And there is an important lesson there. Art evolves when new perspectives are allowed to exist. When society really attempts to limit identity, they don't just restrict individuals, they narrow the emotional vocabulary of culture itself, because art, like progress, expands when human emotions are allowed in the conversation. Bacon didn't just paint people. He painted what it felt to live in a world where people just don't accept you. And in doing so, he helped to shape future generations to help recognize those feelings in themselves. So far, we have talked about figures who were criminalized, misunderstood, or forced to live in ambiguity. But what does the LGBTQ plus impact look like today in a world that is supposedly more accepting, yet still deeply divided? For that, we are moving into the modern era and to one of the most powerful business leaders alive right now, and that is Tim Cook. As the CEO of Apple, Cook leads one of the most influential companies in human history, a company whose products shape communication, creativity, education, and global culture. But his significance goes way beyond technology. In 2014, Cook came out as gay in an essay, becoming the first openly gay CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And that moment really mattered a lot more than what headlines were suggesting, because visibility at that level has never really existed before. For decades, LGBTQ plus professionals, especially in corporate leadership, were often told either directly or indirectly that success required a lot of silence about your own personal identity. The unspoken rule was simple: be exceptional, but don't be visible. Cook challenged that idea. In his statement, he explained that while he had never denied his sexuality, he recognized that being open could really help young people who are struggling with their own identities. That decision wasn't without risk. Corporate leadership operates under intense scrutiny, and executives are expected to represent stability and broad public acceptance. Coming out publicly meant knowingly stepping into political debates, cultural backlash, and global criticism, especially in markets where LGBTQ plus rights remained contested. Yet Cook didn't frame his identity as controversy, but as humanity. And this represents a shift from earlier generations. Leonardo da Vinci lived with ambiguity. Alan Turing was punished. Francis Bacon had to express his identity through art. Tim Cook leads openly. That progression shows measurable change, but it also shows how recent that social change is. We are not talking about ancient history. We are talking about the past decade. And even today, LGBTQ plus visibility in leadership remains relatively rare, especially in regards to the broader population. Cook's presence really challenges a remaining stereotype that LGBTQ plus identities only exist in creative spaces. Instead, it demonstrates that queer people shape finance, engineering, global infrastructure, and technological innovation at its highest levels. But visibility isn't just symbolic, it changes possibility. When young people see someone like themselves leading one of the most powerful worldwide companies, it does help quietly expand what they think their future could look like. Representation doesn't create talent, it removes the psychological ceiling that was placed above it. And that is really why moments like this matter, especially during periods where rights or acceptance feels very uncertain again, because progress isn't only measured by laws, it's measured by who feels safe enough to exist openly. Across centuries, LGBTQ plus people have consistently been present at moments where humanity moved forward. Leonardo da Vinci helped to define art, science, and curiosity itself. Alan Turing laid the foundations of computing and helped to end a world war. Francis Bacon reshaped how we understood emotion and how we show our identity through art. Tim Cook leads one of the most influential and biggest companies in the modern era. All are different centuries, different industries, and very different lives. But there is a same underlying truth. Human progress has never been built by one type of person, and yet history does show another uncomfortable repeating pattern. The very societies that often benefited from these people are often the societies that really struggled to accept them. When laws targeting LGBTQ plus people are appearing, they are often framed as moral debates, cultural disagreements, or political necessities. But I think history helps us to reframe that conversation entirely. Restricting LGBTQ+ people isn't just about identity, it's always meant limiting human potential. When people are forced to hide to just survive or defend the right to just exist, energy that could go into invention, creativity, discovery is often being redirected towards safety and self-protection. Imagine if Turing had been protected and supported instead of prosecuted. Imagine how much further his research could have gone. Imagine the ideas that have never been realised because others like him have chose silence or have been pushed out entirely. That isn't a hypothetical, it's historical loss. And that's why conversations about equality are not separate from progress. They are directly connected. A society that allows more people to exist openly gains more perspectives, more solutions, and more imagination. Diversity isn't charity, it's progress. It's strength. Because let's be honest, breakthroughs rarely come from uniform thinking. They come from people who see the world differently, people shaped by experiences outside the day-to-day norm. I want this video to not just be about famous names or some historical achievements. It's about a truth that is really impossible to ignore once you see the pattern. LGBTQ+ people have never been outsiders to human progress. They have always been a part of its foundation. Queer individuals have helped to shape how we communicate, how we think, how we create, and how we understand the world. And yet, history shows something completely paradoxical. Society often celebrates contributions long after it struggles to accept the people behind them. We praise genius once it's safe. We honour innovation once the discomfort has passed. We apologise decades, sometimes centuries, too late. That's why moments like the one we are living through right now is so important, because when the rights are beginning to move backwards, when laws threaten visibility or safety, history should be giving us a warning. We have seen this before. This conversation isn't about forcing agreement or demanding perfection. It's about empathy. It's about recognizing that behind every political headline are real people trying to live ordinary lives, to love, to work, to create, to exist without fear. The LGBTQ community isn't asking to rewrite humanity's story. They've already helped to write it. The question is whether we really choose to acknowledge that truth while people are still here to experience that acceptance, or only after history turns them into symbols that we wish we had treated better. Acceptance isn't just kindness, it's investment in a future where more people feel safe enough to contribute their full selves to the world. And maybe that's the real lesson running through every story in this video. Human progress has always depended on courage. Not just the courage to invent or to create, but the courage to exist authentically in a world that doesn't always understand you yet. So regardless of who someone loves, how they identify, or how they present themselves, the principle remains simple. A world that makes space for everyone becomes a world capable of more. So what do you guys think? Please let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Of course, I really want this to be a safe space, so if you are commenting, please be respectful, and I don't want any unneeded negativity in the comments. There has been so many negative and upsetting headlines recently about rights really going backwards, and it is so heartbreaking to see. So I hope you can exist as who you are and love how you want to love, and that you don't feel scared of your existence. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like the video down below and subscribe. I make new videos every week and I really do appreciate all the support. If you do have any ideas on videos you would like to see coming up, then please just comment them down below. I'm always open to any suggestions. If you have heard a lot of dog noise in the back, my dog has been walking around today. He is obviously wanting some attention, but if you did hear any noise, please, that is the reason why. Just excuse that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.